In the sun-baked town of Redemption Springs, where dust devils dance across empty streets and time seems to stand still, a deadly mistake is about to be made. 5 young outlaws, fresh off their latest robbery and drunk on their own success, have just spotted what they think is the perfect mark. A 90-year-old cowboy, slouched in his rocking chair outside the Last Chance saloon. His weathered hands rest quietly on his lap, his holster collecting dust at his side. To them, he's nothing but a relic of a bygone era, another piece of the Old West waiting to fade away. What these arrogant young guns don't know is that they're looking at Samuel "Lightning" McCullough, the legendary lawman who once cleared out the infamous Carson gang in less than 6 seconds. 9 decades of hard living haven't dulled his instincts or slowed his draw. They've only made them deadlier. They're about to learn what outlaws 3 generations before them discovered the hard way. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that looks like prey. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun crept over the horizon, painting Redemption Springs in hues of amber and gold. Samuel McCullough's weathered hands wrapped around a tin cup of black coffee as he performed his daily ritual, watching the town wake up from his front porch rocking chair. Every morning for the past 30 years, he'd observed the same dance of life unfold before him, each day a little different, yet somehow always the same. Old Joe Miller unlocked his general store, the bell above the door chiming its familiar "Welcome." Martha Wilson swept her porch next door, pausing to wave at Samuel with a warm smile that carried decades of shared history. The town was changing, but these morning constants remained, like the steady tick of a well-worn pocket watch. "Morning, Mr. McCullough," called young Tommy Peterson, barely 12, as he rushed past with his father's lunch pail. "Ma says to remind you about Sunday dinner." Samuel's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Tell your ma I wouldn't miss her pot roast. For all the gold in California." His voice carried the weight of years, gravelly but strong, like boots crunching on desert gravel. The sound of hoofbeats drew his attention as Sarah, his granddaughter, rode into town on her chestnut mare. 35. She was the town's only doctor, carrying both modern medicine and old-world wisdom in her leather doctor's bag. She inherited his sharp eyes and steady hands, though she used them for healing rather than gunfighting. "Grandpa," she called out, dismounting with practiced ease. "Already holding court, I see." She climbed the steps to plant a kiss on his cheek, her face turning serious as she checked his pulse with professional concern. "Save your fussing for your patients, girl," he chuckled, though they both knew he secretly appreciated her care. "I've survived worse than old age." Sarah's reply was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Tom Parker, his badge catching the morning light. At 40, Parker was still learning the ways of the West. Having moved from back east 5 years ago, he carried himself with authority but never failed to seek Samuel's counsel when trouble brewed. "Mr. McCullough," Parker nodded respectfully. "Thought you'd want to know. Telegraph came in from Tucson. They're saying the Hawkins boys have been spotted heading north. 3 banks hit in the last month." Samuel's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. The Hawkins gang represented everything wrong with the new breed of outlaw. No code, no honor, just young wolves drunk on violence and easy money. They weren't like the outlaws of his day, who at least lived by certain rules. "Tom," Samuel said, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "when trouble comes looking for a home, it always finds the quietest towns first." He shifted in his chair, the wood creaking beneath him. "Keep your eyes sharp," the sheriff nodded, understanding the wisdom in those words. As he walked away, the townspeople going about their morning business cast respectful glances toward Samuel's porch. To them, he wasn't just another old-timer. He was living history, a bridge between the wild days of their parents' stories and the uncertain present. Sarah watched the interaction with knowing eyes. "You feel it too, don't you, Grandpa? Something's coming." Samuel took another sip of his coffee, now grown cold. The wind's changing, girl. Been watching it stir up dust from the south all week. His hand unconsciously brushed against the holster at his side, a gesture so subtle only Sarah would notice it. As the morning wore on, more townsfolk passed by, each offering a greeting or a moment of conversation. They all knew the stories. How Samuel Lightning McCullough had brought law to the lawless, how his draw was faster than a rattlesnake's strike, how he'd faced down the Carson gang single-handed. But what they saw now was a quiet guardian, a living reminder of when justice wore a six-pointed star and was measured by a man's word and the speed of his draw. What none of them realized was that beneath that peaceful exterior, the legendary lawman was as sharp as ever. Every morning, before anyone else was awake, he still practiced his draw in the pre-dawn darkness. Every evening, he cleaned his weapon with the same meticulous care he'd learned as a young man. Time hadn't dulled his skills. It had honed them like a fine blade against a whetstone. Samuel rocked slowly, watching his town, his home, move through another morning. The peace felt fragile somehow, like the last rays of sunset before a storm. In his 90 years, he'd learned to read the signs, in nature, in men, in the very air itself, and every instinct, every lesson bought with blood and pain, told him that Redemption Springs would soon need its old guardian once more. The afternoon heat shimmered above Redemption Springs' main street as Samuel made his way toward the telegraph office. Modern contraptions had been creeping into town like unwelcome guests. First the telegraph lines, then talk of telephone poles, and now rumors of automobiles coming from the city. Progress, they called it. But Samuel had seen how progress could turn peaceful towns into graveyards. Inside the telegraph office, young Billy Matthews was tapping away at his key, the rhythmic clicking filling the cool air. The boy's father had been one of Samuel's deputies, killed 15 years ago by cattle rustlers. Now Billy served as the town's link to the outside world, his fingers speaking a language of dots and dashes that Samuel never quite trusted. "Got another message about those railroad men, Mr. McCullough," Billy said, looking up from his work. "They're saying the line's coming through whether folks want it or not. Meeting set for next week." Samuel nodded slowly, his eyes distant. The railroad meant change, big change. It meant more people, more money, and more trouble. He'd seen it happen to other towns, watched them transform from quiet communities into bustling hives of activity, their character stripped away like a paint in a sandstorm. Outside, a steam tractor chugged past, belching black smoke into the clear desert air. Samuel remembered when the loudest sound in town was the church bell on Sundays. Now machines were everywhere, their metal voices drowning out the natural rhythm of horse hooves and wagon wheels. Sheriff Parker fell into step beside him as he left the telegraph office. "Times are changing, aren't they, sir?" The younger man's voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for what's coming. These new outlaws, they're different. They don't care about the old ways, the old codes." "Tom," Samuel said, stopping to face him, "a man's character ain't measured by the tools he uses, but by the choices he makes. Gun or telephone, horse or automobile. What matters is the heart behind them." They watched as Sarah treated a young ranch hand who'd been kicked by a horse. Her medical bag contained both traditional herbs, learned from local healers, and modern medicines from back east. She'd found a way to bridge the gap between old and new, something the town was struggling to do, the world spinning faster every day. Samuel continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "But some things don't change. Good men still stand up. Evil still needs facing down. And justice," he patted his holster, "justice still needs a steady hand to guide it." A group of children played nearby, their game a mixture of cowboys and railroad conductors. Samuel watched them with a hint of sadness in his eyes. These young ones would grow up in a different world than he had known. They might never understand what it meant to track a man's trail for days through empty country, to face down evil with nothing but iron on your hip and steel in your heart. The sun was settling. toward the horizon when Samuel made his way back to his porch. Sarah joined him, bringing a fresh cup of coffee and her usual concern. "The town's worried about these changes, Grandpa," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "They're looking to you more than ever. Even Sheriff Parker seems lost sometimes." Samuel sipped his coffee, considering her words. "Change comes whether we want it or not, girl, like a prairie fire. Can't stop it, but you can prepare for it, guide it. Make sure it doesn't burn everything good in its path." The evening stage rolled in, bringing with it newspapers from the city and more signs of the encroaching modern world. Samuel read the headlines about automobiles replacing horses, about electric lights pushing back the darkness, about law becoming more about papers and procedure than about right and wrong. But as darkness settled over Redemption Springs, Samuel knew that some things remained constant. The stars still guided true. A man's word still meant something out here, and evil still needed to be met with courage. The methods might change, but the principles, justice, honor, protection of the innocent, those were as eternal as the desert itself. The cool night wind carried whispers of change, but it also carried something else, something that made Samuel's hand drift to his holster. Trouble was coming, as it always did, and when it arrived, it wouldn't care about progress or the changing times. It would only understand one language, the same language Samuel had spoken all his life, the language of the gun. Sheriff Parker burst into the saloon just as the afternoon heat peaked, his normally composed face tight with concern. Samuel looked up from his usual corner table, noting the telegram clutched in the lawman's hand. The few patrons present fell, silent, sensing the gravity in the air. "5 men dead in Copper Creek," Parker announced, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Bank robbery gone wrong. Witnesses say it was the Hawkins gang. They shot the teller just to prove they could." He laid the telegram on Samuel's table, hands shaking slightly. "They're headed this way." Samuel studied the yellow paper, his weathered fingers tracing the words. The details were familiar, too familiar. Young guns trying to build a reputation. Through brutality rather than skill. He'd seen their kind before, each generation more savage than the last. "That's not all," Parker continued, lowering his voice. "Word is, they've got Jake Hawkins leading them now, fresh out of territorial prison. The name hung in the air like gunsmoke. Jake Hawkins, the last surviving member of the Carson Gang massacre, the one Samuel hadn't caught 30 years ago, the one who'd sworn revenge. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with promise. Sarah's horse clattered past, heading for the Peterson Ranch, where young Billy had taken ill. Life in Redemption Springs continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the approaching storm. "They hit 3 towns in the last month," Parker went on, spreading out more telegrams. Each time getting bolder, more vicious. In Silver Junction, they held the banker's family hostage for hours, even after they got the money, just for sport. Samuel's eyes narrowed as he read the reports. The pattern was clear. The gang was cutting a path straight to Redemption Springs. This wasn't random. This was personal. "Tom," Samuel said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of years of experience, "send word to the outlying farms. Get the women and children into town. Have the men bring their rifles." He stood slowly, his joints protesting the movement. "And wire Judge Harrison in Tucson. Tell him we might need him to convene court here soon." The saloon's regulars exchanged glances. They'd seen this before, the calm deliberation in Samuel's eyes, the subtle shift in his posture. The legendary lawman was emerging from behind the elderly facade. Martha Wilson hurried in, her usually neat hair disheveled. "Sheriff, Samuel, riders just came in from the Webster place. Said they spotted 5 men camping in Devil's Canyon. They had fresh horses, city clothes, and mean eyes." Samuel moved to the window, studying the gathering storm clouds. Devil's Canyon was just 2 hours' ride from town. "They're not camping," he said, his voice grim. "They're waiting, watching our routine, learning our weaknesses." The news spread through town like wildfire. Shops began closing early, children were called in from play, and men gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. The air grew thick with tension and the metallic taste of approaching rain. Sarah found her grandfather on his porch later. That evening, cleaning his revolver with practiced precision. She'd seen him do this 1,000 times, but tonight was different. Tonight, each movement carried purpose beyond mere maintenance. "You knew this day would come, didn't you?" she asked, settling beside him. "Ever since Jake Hawkins escaped prison." Samuel checked the cylinder's action, the soft click punctuating the evening silence. "Some debts don't die with time, girl. Some men carry hatred until it consumes them, turns them into something worse than what they were." A distant roll of thunder echoed his words. Sarah watched as lanterns were lit throughout town, each window a small beacon against the growing darkness. "The town will stand behind you, Grandpa." "You know that. That's what I'm afraid of," Samuel replied, his voice heavy. "These boys won't just be coming for me. They'll want to destroy everything I care about, everything I protected all these years." As night fell, the first fat drops of rain began to fall, carrying the scent of dust and sage. Samuel remained on, his porch, a dark silhouette against the lamplight. To anyone watching from the shadows, he might have appeared to be simply an old man waiting out the storm. But the citizens of Redemption Springs knew better. They recognized the stillness in his posture, the vigilance in his gaze. Their aging guardian was preparing for war. And this time, the battle wouldn't just be about law and order. It would be about something deeper, a final stand between the old ways and the new, between honor and chaos, between justice and revenge. In the distance, lightning split the sky, illuminating the town for a brief, brilliant moment. Samuel's hand rested on his holster, and in that flash of light, decades seemed to fall away from his face. The legend of Lightning McCullough wasn't just a story from the past. It was about to be written anew in blood and gunsmoke. They came with the setting sun, 5 riders silhouetted against the orange sky. The thunder of hooves on packed earth drew every eye in Redemption Springs, and mothers quietly ushered their children indoors. Store owners stood in doorways, hands nervously adjusting their lapels, while the saloon fell into an uneasy silence. Jake Hawkins led the pack, a man in his 50s with cold eyes and prison-pale skin. Behind him rode 4 younger men, each carrying the latest weapons money could buy. Their clothes were city-cut but trail-dusty, and their spurs rang against the wooden sidewalks as they dismounted outside the Last Chance saloon. Samuel didn't move from his rocking chair. He merely sipped his coffee, eyes half-lidded but missing nothing. From his vantage point, he noted how the youngest of the gang, barely 20, kept adjusting his gun belt, a sure sign of inexperience. The others carried themselves with the cocky assurance of men who'd never faced a faster draw. "Well, well," Jake's voice carried across the street, deliberately loud. "If it ain't the famous Lightning McCullough himself, time hasn't been kind to you, old man." His words dripped with 3 decades of stored venom. The townsfolk froze, watching the scene unfold. Sheriff Parker stood in the doorway of his office, hand hovering near his gun, but Samuel gave him a subtle shake of the head. This wasn't the time. Not yet. "Seems prison ain't taught you much about manners, Jake," Samuel replied, his voice carrying easily despite its age. "Still making the same mistakes. Still leading young fools to their deaths." The 4 younger outlaws bristled, hands twitching toward their weapons. But Jake held up a staying hand, a cold smile playing across his face. Now, boys, show some respect for your elders. We've got time." He turned to address the gathered townspeople. "Folks, allow me to introduce myself. Jake Hawkins, come. To pay my respects to an old friend. Me and my boys might be staying a while." Samuel watched as Jake's gang spread out, marking their territory. They moved like wolves, all predatory grace and barely contained violence. The tallest one, with a scar running down his cheek, kicked over a water barrel just to watch it splash. Another leaned against a post, deliberately blowing smoke toward a group of women hurrying past. Sarah appeared from her clinic, medical bag in hand, her eyes meeting Samuel's in silent communication. She'd faced down her share of tough customers, but these men were different. These men carried death in their eyes. "Your boy Tommy grew up real nice, Jake," Samuel said quietly, but his words cut through the tension like a knife. "Shame he won't be joining you. Prison walls are thick, but news still travels." Jake's face darkened, the smile turning to a snarl. Everyone knew about Tommy Hawkins, shot dead trying to rob a train 3 months back. It was the reason Jake had broken out, the reason he gathered these young guns, the reason he'd come to Redemption Springs. "Enjoy your evening, old man," Jake spat, turning toward the saloon. "Way I figure it, you've got precious few left." His gang followed him inside, leaving behind a wake of whispers and fearful glances. As darkness settled over the town, Samuel remained in his chair, seemingly at ease. But those who knew him best saw the subtle changes, the newfound alertness in his posture, the way his right hand never strayed far from his holster, the calculating look in his eyes as he surveyed the street. The game had begun, and every soul in Redemption Springs knew that blood would be spilled before it ended. The only question was whose. The sun climbed high over Redemption Springs, baking the dirt streets into hardpan. 3 days had passed since the Hawkins gang arrived, 3 days of escalating tension. They'd taken over the saloon, running up tabs they didn't pay, breaking the furniture for sport, and terrorizing anyone who dared object. Samuel watched from his usual spot as the youngest gang member stumbled out of the saloon, drunk before noon. The boy made his way toward the old lawman, encouraged by the hoots and hollers of his companions who crowded the saloon's entrance. "Hey, old-timer," the youth slurred, deliberately scuffing his boots across Samuel's porch. "They say you used to be somebody. Say you was the fastest draw west of the Mississippi." He swayed, liquid courage making him bold. "I don't see it." Samuel didn't respond, didn't even look up. His coffee cup remained steady in his weathered hands, steam rising. "In the morning air, you deaf as well as old." The young outlaw moved closer, hand resting on his pristine gun belt. "I'm talking to you, Gramps." From inside the saloon, Jake Hawkins watched with calculating eyes. This was what he'd been waiting for, a chance to see if the legend had grown soft with age. "Son," Samuel finally spoke, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. "Your mama didn't raise you to die this young." A ripple of tension ran through the gathering crowd. The young outlaw's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "You threatening me, old man? You got some nerve, sitting there acting high and mighty." His hand twitched closer to his gun. "Maybe it's time someone showed this town that legends can bleed." Sarah emerged from her clinic across the street, her face tight with concern. Sheriff Parker stepped out of his office, but Samuel's slight headshake kept him in place. "Last chance, boy," Samuel said quietly. "Walk away. Live to see tomorrow." The young outlaw's laugh was ugly, fueled by whiskey and bravado. "Draw, old man. Let's see if lightning still strikes." Time seemed to slow. Samuel's eyes, sharp despite his years, took in everything. The youth's poor stance, his grip too tight on the gun, the telltale tension in his shoulder that would telegraph his draw. "No." Samuel's response was simple, final. "What's wrong? Too scared?" The youth took another step forward, spurs jingling. "Draw, damn you!" "A man who's eager to prove himself," Samuel said, still not moving, "usually proves himself a fool." His eyes finally met the young outlaw's. "I won't draw on you, boy, because the moment I do, you're dead, and you're too young to die for another man's hatred." The last words were aimed at Jake Hawkins, who stood watching from the saloon doorway. The gang leader's face darkened with fury. "Coward!" The young outlaw screamed, hand dropping to his gun. What happened next was so fast most people missed it. One moment Samuel was seated, the next his gun was out, the young man's weapon spinning away across the dirt, his hand bleeding from where the bullet had grazed it. Samuel hadn't even stood up. Silence fell over the street like a heavy blanket. The young outlaw stared at his bleeding hand in disbelief. all color drained from his face. Behind him, Jake Hawkins' expression was murderous. "Now you know," Samuel said softly, holstering his gun with practiced ease. "Take that knowledge and leave. There's no future for you here." The young man stumbled backward, cradling his hand, his earlier bravado shattered. As he fled past his companions, Jake's cold voice cut through the silence. "You just signed their death warrants, old man. Every person in this town." He turned to go back inside, then paused. "And this time, I'll make sure you live long enough to watch them all die." Samuel's reply was lost in the sound of the saloon doors slamming shut, but his eyes told the story. The time for warnings had passed. Blood would flow in Redemption Springs, and soon the morning dawned blood-red, the sun struggling through dust-heavy clouds. Samuel stood at his window, watching the town stir to life, knowing that today everything would change. After the confrontation with the young gun, Jake's gang had grown. Bolder, more reckless. It was only a matter of time before someone got killed. That time came sooner than expected. The first shot rang out, just as old Joe Miller was opening his store. The bullet shattered his front window, sending glass raining down on the sidewalk. Two of Jake's men emerged from the saloon, guns drawn and laughing. "Oops," the taller one called out, his voice thick with mockery. "Guess we need target practice." Before anyone could react, more shots followed. They weren't aiming to kill, not yet. This was about terror, about breaking the town's spirit. Bullets splintered wood, shattered more windows, sent people scrambling for cover. Samuel's hand moved to his holster, but Sarah's voice stopped him. "Grandpa, wait!" She hurried up his porch steps. "That's what they want. They're trying to draw you out." A scream cut through the morning air. Martha Wilson lay sprawled in the street, clutching her arm where a stray bullet had caught her. The gang members just laughed harder. Something changed in Samuel's eyes then. A shift from controlled patience to deadly purpose. "Get her to your clinic," he said quietly to Sarah, "and stay there." He stepped off his porch with the same measured pace he'd used for 90 years, his boots leaving deliberate prints in the dust. The gang members spotted him, their laughter dying as they recognized the look on his face. "Well, boys," Samuel's voice carried clearly down the street, "seems you've forgotten yesterday's lesson." His hands hung loosely at his sides. Nowhere, near his gun. "Time for some remedial education," the tall one sneered, raising his pistol. "You got lucky with the kid, old man. We ain't so green." Samuel didn't bother responding. His eyes tracked every movement, every twitch, every tell. These two were faster than the young one from yesterday, but they still had the same fatal flaw. They thought speed was all that mattered. "Last chance," Samuel offered, though he knew they wouldn't take it. Couldn't take it with Jake watching from the saloon window. "Walk away," they answered with bullets. What happened next became part of Redemption Springs' legend. Samuel moved. Like his old nickname, like lightning. Two shots, so close together they sounded like one. The tall gunman's weapon went flying, along with 3 of his fingers. His partner's gun arm took a bullet through the shoulder, the impact spinning him to the ground. Neither shot was fatal. Samuel "Lightning" McCullough didn't miss. He'd placed those bullets exactly where he meant to. The street fell silent, except for the wounded men's groans. Samuel hadn't even drawn until they'd fired, but he'd still beaten them both. His gun slid back into its holster with hardly a sound. Jake Hawkins burst out of the saloon, his face contorted with rage. His remaining man flanked him, weapon already. Drawn! "Kill him!" Jake screamed. "Kill him now!" More shots exploded across the street, but this time Samuel wasn't alone. Sheriff Parker's rifle barked from his office door, forcing Jake and his man back into the saloon. 2 townsmen who'd served in the war added their firearms to the mix, providing covering fire. Samuel took advantage of the chaos to drag the wounded gang members to safety. "Sarah!" he called, and his granddaughter darted out to help the injured. Men into her clinic. Even now, with blood staining the street, Samuel's code held firm. You didn't leave wounded men to die, even enemies. When the shooting stopped, Jake's voice carried from the saloon. "This ain't over, McCullough. Not by..." A long shot, no, Samuel agreed quietly, checking his gun cylinder. But it started proper now. He looked around at his town, at the broken glass and bullet holes, at the fear and anger in people's faces. And it'll end the same way it did 30 years ago. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the dust-filled air into a golden haze. Blood darkened the dirt where the gang members had fallen, a stark reminder that Redemption Springs had just entered a new chapter in its history. The time for warnings and patience had passed. War had come to town, wearing spurs and carrying 6 guns. Sarah's clinic had become a sanctuary of whispered voices and tense faces. The wounded gang members lay sedated, their injuries tended with the same care she'd give any patient. Outside, the town buzzed with nervous energy as people repaired. Broken windows and swept-away glass, stealing glances at the silent saloon where Jake and his remaining man had barricaded themselves. "You should have killed them," Sheriff Parker said quietly to Samuel, watching as Sarah changed bandages. "Those boys won't forget this humiliation. They'll come back worse." Samuel leaned against the clinic's wall, his weathered face showing no hint of the morning's exertion. "Killing's easy, Tom. Any fool with a trigger finger can do that. It's showing mercy that takes real strength." A commotion outside drew their attention. Riders were approaching, 3 men from the Webster Ranch pushing their horses hard. Samuel stepped onto the street to meet them, noting their grim expressions. "Raiders hit the south pasture," the lead rider reported, wiping dust from his face. "Drove off 30 head of cattle. Left this." He handed Samuel a piece of paper, crude words scrawled across it. "Next time it's bodies instead of beef." The news spread through town like wildfire. Jake had allies outside, more men, more guns, more threats to worry about. Samuel studied the note, recognizing the implicit message. The gang was done playing games. "We need to evacuate," Parker insisted, his hand nervously adjusting his gun belt. "Get the women and children out while we can. Send for the territorial marshals." "No marshals," Samuel said firmly. "By the time they get here, there won't be a town left to save." He looked around at the gathering townspeople, seeing fear mixing with determination in their eyes. "And nobody's leaving. This is our home." Inside the clinic, one of the wounded gang members stirred, crying out in pain. Sarah administered more laudanum, her movements efficient but gentle. "They're young," she said when Samuel checked on her. "Probably never been shot before, never really understood what it means to face someone who knows what they're doing." Samuel watched her work, seeing so much of her grandmother in her steady hands, an unflinching dedication to healing. "Just like their boss," he said softly. "Jake never did learn. 30 years ago he ran while his friends died. Now he's leading these boys down the same path." The day wore on, tension thick in the air. People moved in groups, weapons close at hand. The saloon remained quiet, but everyone knew Jake was in there, planning, waiting. Samuel had the town post watches, with Sheriff Parker organizing defensive positions. As evening approached, Billy Matthews came running from the telegraph office, waving a yellow paper. "Wire from Tucson," he gasped. 3 more riders seen heading this way, known associates of Jake Hawkins. They'll be here by morning." Samuel nodded as if this was exactly what he'd expected. "Tom, get word to the outlying farms. Tell them to bring their families into town tonight. We'll use the church as a shelter." He turned to the gathered townspeople. "Anyone who can handle a gun, report to the sheriff. The rest of you, start stockpiling food and water. This siege might last a while." Sarah touched his arm gently. "What about my patients?" "Keep treating them," Samuel replied. "A man's worth isn't measured by the company he keeps, and they might prove useful when Jake's reinforcements arrive." The sun set behind gathering clouds, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Samuel stood on his porch, watching as the town transformed into an armed camp. Barricades rose at key intersections, rifles appeared in windows, and the nervous energy of morning hardened into grim resolve. From the saloon came the sound of breaking glass and harsh laughter. Jake was making sure everyone knew he wasn't concerned about the town's preparations, But Samuel recognized the hollow bravado in those sounds. Jake was scared, not of dying, but of history repeating itself. "You were right," Sarah said, joining him on the porch, "about mercy being stronger than killing. Those two young men in there, seeing how you chose not to kill them, how we're treating them with dignity. It's affecting them, making them think." Samuel smiled slightly. "Every man has to choose his own path, girl. Sometimes they just need to be shown there's another way." His hand rested on his gun, the weight familiar and comfortable. But come morning, Jake and his friends might not leave us that choice. Night settled over Redemption Springs like a heavy blanket, bringing with it the promise of violence to come. In homes throughout town, families huddled together, praying for safety. In the church, children slept while their fathers stood guard. And on his porch, Samuel McCullough rocked quietly, his eyes never leaving the saloon, waiting for dawn and whatever it might bring. In the hushed hours before dawn, Sarah found herself in the sheriff's office, rifling through decades-old wanted posters and case files. The yellowed papers told a story that had shaped their town, one that few people alive still remembered. Her grandfather's story, the Carson Gang massacre of 1894, stood out among the documents. Newspaper clippings spoke of 6 hardened killers who had terrorized 3 territories, leaving a trail of bodies and burning banks in their wake. They had seemed unstoppable until they met Samuel "Lightning" McCullough. "You won't find the whole truth in those papers." Samuel's voice came from the doorway, making her start. He moved into the office, touching the old documents with gentle reverence. "Some stories are written in blood, not ink." Sarah spread out a particularly dramatic article. "It says you faced down all 6 of them single-handedly, that you drew faster than any man alive." "Papers always did like their tall tales," Samuel said, easing into a chair. "Truth is, I was just doing my job. The Carson boys had robbed the bank, killed 3 good people. They were holed up in the old Morrison ranch, thinking they were safe." His eyes grew distant with memory. Jake was just a kid then, running with bad company, like those boys in Sarah's clinic now. He picked up one of the wanted posters, studying the face of Bill Carson, the gang's leader. They sent word they'd kill their hostages if anyone tried to come for them. But they didn't count on one thing. I'd grown up in those hills, knew every cave, every trail, every shadow where a man could hide. Sheriff Parker entered quietly, carrying coffee. He'd heard pieces of this story, but never the full tale. Now he sat, listening as Samuel continued. "I didn't go in guns blazing like the papers said. Waited till night, till they were celebrating their score, used the storm for cover." Samuel's voice grew softer, heavy with the weight of memory. "Took them one by one. Clean shots, quick and precise. No glory in it, just necessity." "But Jake got away," Sarah prompted gently. Samuel nodded. He was supposed to be watching the back door, but when the shooting started, he ran, left his own brother dying on that floor. His hand unconsciously moved to his side, where an old scar lay hidden. Caught a bullet as he fled. Thought he was dead until news came that they'd found him half alive in a mining camp 3 days later. Standing, Samuel moved to the window. The first hints of dawn were painting the sky. He spent 30 years in territorial prison, nursing his hatred, blaming me for his choices, for his brother's death. Now he's out, teaching these young guns the same bitter lessons. Sarah gathered the old papers, a new understanding dawning. "That's why you didn't kill those 2 boys today. You see them like Jake was, young, misguided, still with a chance to choose differently." "Every man deserves that chance," Samuel said. "Even if they don't take it." He turned back to them, his face set with purpose. "But Jake's made his choice. He'll keep coming, keep pushing, until..." The sound of horses approaching cut him off. Through the window, they saw 3 riders entering town, their shapes dark against the growing light. Jake's reinforcements had arrived. Sheriff Parker checked, his rifle, face grim. "How do you want to play this?" Samuel straightened, years seeming to fall away from his stance. "Same way we did back then. Smart, patient." He checked his revolver with practiced ease. "Jake thinks he's settling an old score. but he's really just repeating old mistakes. And this time, there's nowhere left for him to run, as if to punctuate. His words, a shot rang out from the saloon. One of the arriving riders raised his arm in response. The gesture was clear. They were ready to end this, here and now. Sarah touched her grandfather's arm. The wounded boys in my clinic, they've been talking about leaving this life, about how nobody ever showed them mercy before. Your way is working. Samuel smiled slightly, but his eyes remained hard. Good. Because before this day is done, they're going to see the difference between mercy. He holstered his gun with fluid grace. And justice. The sun breached the horizon, painting Redemption Springs in shades of gold and shadow. In the growing light, Samuel McCullough walked out to meet what was coming, every step measured, every movement precise. Behind him, 30 years of history waited to repeat or reform itself. The time for old wounds to heal or bleed anew had come. The three newcomers brought more than just guns to Redemption Springs. They brought a cold professionalism that Jake's younger followers had lacked. These weren't boys playing at being outlaws. These were killers, men who'd made their living. With iron and blood. Their first move came at breakfast time. A volley of precise shots took out the water tower behind the station, sending a flood cascading through the streets. As townspeople rushed to save what they could, more bullets kept them pinned down, unable to reach the precious water barrels. "Testing our defenses," Samuel muttered, watching from behind a stack of crates with Sheriff Parker. "Seeing how we react where we're weakest." His eyes narrowed as he spotted one of the newcomers moving between buildings. "That's Cole Reeves on the left, used to ride with the Clayton brothers before they were hanged." A woman's scream cut through the morning. One of the gang had grabbed young Mary Peterson, using her as a shield as he moved toward the bank. Her father rushed out with a shotgun, only to be driven back by gunfire from the saloon. Samuel's hand moved to his holster, but Sarah's voice stopped him. "Grandpa, wait!" She pointed to the clinic's second-floor window, where Bill Henderson, the town's best hunter, was already taking aim with his rifle. The shot was perfect. The outlaw's hat flew off, making him flinch and loosen his grip. Mary broke free, running to safety as Bill's second shot kicked up dust at the man's feet, forcing him back toward the saloon. "Good," Samuel nodded. "The town's learning, fighting smart. But Jake's men were learning too." They split up, taking positions in different buildings, creating crossfire zones that made movement through the streets nearly impossible. By noon, they had effectively cut the town in half, with the saloon as their fortress. Inside Sarah's clinic, the two wounded gang members watched the unfolding violence with growing unease. The younger one, barely 20, turned to Sarah as she changed his bandages. "We didn't sign up for this," he said quietly. "Jake said it would be easy. Just scare an old man, rob the bank, ride out rich. There's nothing easy about what's coming," Sarah replied, her voice firm but kind. "But you boys still have a choice. My grandfather gave you that when he chose not to kill you." A massive explosion rocked the street. Jake's men had blown up the livery stable, sending horses stampeding through town. In the chaos, they managed to take over the general store, gaining another strategic position. Samuel watched it all with calculating eyes. Each move, each shot, told him something about their plan. They were trying to wear the town down, break its spirit, but they'd underestimated these people, just as they'd underestimated him. "Tom," he called to the sheriff, "get word to everyone. When night falls, we're going to show these boys how we did things in the old days." As the sun began to set, more shots rang out from the saloon. But this time, they weren't aimed at people. They targeted the oil lamps lighting the street, plunging sections of the town into darkness. "They think the dark will help them," Samuel said, checking his gun with practiced hands. "They forget who taught Jake everything he knows about night. Fighting." Sarah brought ammunition and supplies to the defenders, moving carefully through the shadows. She paused by her grandfather. "The young one, Michael, he's talking about giving himself up. Says he'll tell us their plans." Samuel nodded. "Slowly. Every man has to choose his path." But we need to end this before Jake realizes his men are losing heart. A bullet whizzed past, embedding itself in the wall behind them. From the saloon, Jake's voice carried through the gathering darkness. "Come on out, old man. Face me like you should have 30 years ago." Samuel's reply was calm, measured. "Still trying to fight yesterday's battles, Jake. Still blaming everyone but yourself." The answer came in another burst of gunfire, wild and angry. Samuel just smiled slightly. Jake was losing control, letting emotion cloud his judgment. Just like before, night settled over Redemption Springs, like a heavy blanket, broken only by muzzle flashes and the occasional cry of pain. The siege had begun in earnest, and with it the real test of whether an old lawman's experience could overcome desperate men's violence. But Samuel McCullough had learned long ago that the darkest hours often came just before dawn, and he had always been good at waiting for the light. In the church basement, Samuel stood before 24 townsmen, their faces illuminated by lantern light. These weren't soldiers or lawmen. They were shopkeepers, farmers, ranchers, men who'd never thought they'd have to fight for their homes. "Ain't no shame in being scared," Samuel told them, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Fear keeps a man alive, makes him think before he acts." He laid out a rough map of the town on a table. "But tonight, we're going to teach Jake's boys about a different kind of fear." The men gathered closer as Samuel explained his plan. Bill Henderson, the hunter who'd saved Mary Peterson, spoke up first. "We know every alley, every rooftop, every cellar in town. They don't." "Exactly," Samuel nodded. "They think they've trapped us. Truth is, they've trapped themselves." In the clinic, Sarah was teaching a group of women how to handle guns and treat wounds. Martha Wilson, her arm still bandaged from the first shooting, proved to be a natural with a rifle. "Never thought I'd need these skills," she said, checking the weapon's action. "Always let the men handle trouble. Times change," Sarah replied, showing another woman how to pack a wound. "So must we." Outside, the sporadic gunfire continued as Jake's men tried to keep the town pinned down, but they were wasting ammunition, shooting at shadows. Samuel's words had spread through the community. "Don't return fire unless you have a clear shot. Don't expose yourself unnecessarily. Wait for the right moment." Young Tommy Peterson, only 15 but tall for his age, came running through the secret passage they dug between buildings. "Mr. McCullough, Michael, the wounded one, he's told us everything about their supplies, their positions, even their signals." Samuel listened as Tommy relayed the information. The boy's father stood nearby, pride and worry warring on his face. This was the world they lived in now, where children had to grow up too fast, where ordinary people had to become warriors. "Your boy's got a good head on his shoulders," Samuel told the father. "Smart, careful, like his mother." He turned back to the gathered men. "Now, thanks to Tommy, we know Jake's got most of his ammunition stored in the saloon cellar. They think it's safe there. They're wrong." The plan took shape quickly. Bill Henderson would take his best shots to the rooftops, keeping the gang's attention up high. Meanwhile, others would move through the cellars and back alleys, getting into position. Samuel would do what he did best: be visible, be a target, keep Jake's hatred focused on him. "What about the bank?" Sheriff Parker asked. "They'll try for it sooner or later." "Let them," Samuel replied with a grim smile. "Willie Chen's family has lived above that bank for 3 generations. His grandfather dug tunnels during the Silver Rush. Think Jake knows about those?" As evening deepened into true night, the townspeople moved into position. Women and children were safely hidden in the church basement with armed guards at every entrance. The wounded gang members were secured in the clinic, under Martha Wilson's watchful eye and steady rifle. Samuel walked his porch one last time, his boots making the familiar boards creak. Sarah joined him, medical bag in hand. "The women are ready," she said, "and scared but not running." "Like your grandmother," Samuel said softly. "She never ran either, not even when the Carson gang came." He checked his gun, more out of habit than necessity. "You know, Jake never understood what really happened that night. Thinks I hunted his gang down alone. He shook his head. Truth is, the whole town helped. Just like now, a shot rang out. From the saloon, taking out another lamp, Jake's voice followed, taunting, "Getting darker, old man. Harder to see what's coming." Samuel didn't bother responding. Let Jake think the darkness was his ally. Let him believe that age had dulled the legend's senses. The time for talk was over. In homes and shops throughout Redemption Springs, people checked their weapons one last time. Fathers hugged their children, wives kissed their husbands, neighbors clasped hands with neighbors. They were no longer just townspeople. They were a community united against those who would destroy their home. The line had been drawn. On one side stood greed, hatred, and violence. On the other stood something stronger, people defending their own, led by a man who'd spent 90 years learning the true meaning of justice. Night fell completely, and Redemption Springs held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. Sarah found the letter while searching through her grandmother's old chest, looking for more bandages. It was yellowed with age, the paper brittle, but the words were still clear. As she read, her hands began to shake. "Grandpa," she called softly, showing him the letter when he entered. "Did you know about this?" Samuel took the paper, his weathered face growing still as he recognized his late wife's handwriting. It was dated just days before the Carson Gang massacre, addressed to Jake Hawkins's mother. "Your boy's running with bad company," the letter read. "Bill Carson and his gang are planning something big. Something terrible. I'm begging you as a mother myself, help me stop this before it's too late. Samuel doesn't know I'm writing this. He still thinks Jake can be saved. But after what happened in Silver Creek," she knew, Sarah whispered. She tried to prevent it all. Samuel sat heavily in a nearby chair, memories flooding back. Mary always saw more than she let on. She knew Jake had good in him, same as I did. But she also saw how Bill Carson was poisoning his mind, turning him mean. A burst of gunfire outside punctuated his words. The gang was getting restless as night deepened, shooting at anything that moved. Jake's mother never responded. Samuel continued, carefully folding the letter. 3 days later, the gang robbed the bank, killed those people, and when I went after them," he paused, the weight of 30 years heavy in his voice. "Mary never told me about the letter. Knew I'd blame myself for not seeing it sooner." Sarah started to respond, but quick footsteps interrupted them. Tommy Peterson burst in, breathing hard. "Mr. McCullough, Michael says there's more, about why Jake really came here." The young gang member was propped up in his clinic bed, guilt written across his face. "Jake's been planning this for years," he said as Samuel approached. "Said his brother's death was just the beginning. Said you took everything from him, so he'd take everything from you. His brother made his own choice," Samuel replied quietly. "Same as Jake did." "No, you don't understand," Michael pressed on. "He found out about the Carson gang's old cash, the gold they stole from the military payroll, the one that was never recovered." His voice dropped lower. "Jake says his brother told him where it was hidden, just before he died that night. Said it was somewhere in town." Suddenly, the pieces fell into place. The gang's strategic positions, the way they'd taken certain buildings, they weren't just trying to control the town. They were searching for something. "The old Morrison Ranch," Samuel said, realization dawning. "That's why they holed up there 30 years ago. The gold was already hidden there, wasn't it?" Sarah's eyes widened. "And now that ranch land is part of the town, right where they built the bank," Samuel finished. "Jake doesn't just want revenge. He wants what he thinks was stolen from him that night, what his brother died protecting." More shots rang out, closer now. Through the window, they could see movement near the bank. Jake's men were getting ready to make their move. "All these years," Samuel mused, "Jake's been sitting in that prison cell, convincing himself that I'm the reason his life went wrong. Building this revenge in his mind, piece by piece. He checked his gun, the motion automatic after decades of practice. But he's still making the same mistake he made back then." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "Thinking gold is worth more than lives." Samuel's voice hardened. "His brother died for that gold. Now he's ready to sacrifice these young men for it too. He looked at Michael, seeing the understanding dawn in the young outlaw's eyes. Some men never learn that the real treasure isn't buried in the ground. It's in the lives we save, the people we protect. Outside, clouds covered the moon, plunging the town into deeper darkness. The sporadic gunfire had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that spoke of approaching violence. "Get word to Tom," Samuel told Sarah. "Jake's men will hit the bank soon, but this time," he smiled grimly, "this time we know what they're really after." As Sarah slipped away to deliver the message, Samuel stood at the window, watching the shadows move through his town. 30 years hadn't changed Jake's greed, hadn't taught him what really mattered. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for the young men he'd dragged into this fight. The ghost of his wife's last attempt to prevent bloodshed hung heavy in the air. Samuel touched the letter in his pocket, drawing strength from Mary's long ago. Wisdom. She'd tried to save Jake with words. Now Samuel would try to save the others with actions, even if that meant putting an end to Jake's obsession once and for all. The betrayal came from where they least expected it. Ted Wilson, Martha's husband of 30 years, the town's telegraph operator, had been passing information to Jake's gang all along. The truth emerged as Sarah was checking on Martha's wounded arm. "Ted's been acting strange," Martha confided, her voice trembling, "disappearing at odd hours. Said he was checking the telegraph lines, but..." She pulled a crumpled note from her pocket. "I found this in his coat. Numbers, times, marks on a town map." Sarah's blood ran cold as she read the note. Ted had marked every defensive position, every escape route, every hiding place they'd prepared, and now he was nowhere to be found. The warning came too late. Gunfire erupted from positions they thought were secure. Jake's men had used Ted's information to slip through their carefully planned defenses, taking up positions behind the townspeople's lines. "Get down!" Samuel shouted as bullets splintered the clinic's window frame. He pushed Sarah behind a heavy cabinet, his reflexes still lightning quick despite his age. Sheriff Parker's voice carried over the chaos. "They're inside the lines." Wilson gave them the tunnel maps. The carefully laid plans were unraveling. The tunnels beneath the bank, their secret advantage, were now a deadly threat. Jake's men could come up anywhere, strike from any direction. Samuel's mind raced, decades of experience cutting through the panic. "Sarah, get to the church. Tell them to fall back to position 3. His voice was calm, but his eyes blazed with controlled fury. "Then find Martha. She'll know where Ted might have gone." More shots rang out, closer now. Through the gathering darkness, they could see Ted Wilson himself, leading Jake's men through the back alleys he'd known all his life. His familiar figure was unmistakable against the fading light. "Why?" Samuel muttered, watching through the clinic window. "Why turn against your own?" The answer came from Michael, the wounded gang member, his voice weak but clear. "Jake promised him a share. Said with the gold, Ted could finally give Martha the life she deserved, take her away from this dying town." A bitter laugh escaped Samuel's lips. Same old Jake, finding a man's weakness, twisting it to his own ends. Outside, the shooting had become strategic, precise. Jake's men were no longer firing wildly. They were targeting specific buildings, specific defenders. They knew exactly where everyone was supposed to be. "Samuel!" Sheriff Parker called out. "They're moving on the bank, using our own plan against us." Through the chaos, Samuel caught glimpses of Ted Wilson's face as he guided the outlaws. The man looked haunted, torn between guilt and determination. He'd made his choice, sold his soul for the promise of gold, and now there was no turning back. "Get word to Bill Henderson," Samuel ordered. "Tell him to shift his men to the roof of the mercantile. Ted won't know about that. It wasn't part of the original plan. But even as he gave the order, Samuel knew they were scrambling now, reacting instead of controlling. Ted's betrayal had done more than expose their defenses. It had shaken the town's trust in itself. If a man like Ted Wilson could turn, who else might break under pressure? The answer came in the form of returned fire from the townspeople's positions. Despite the betrayal, despite the danger, they held their ground. These were people fighting for their homes, their families, their way of life. No amount of gold could buy that kind of loyalty. As night settled fully over Redemption Springs, Samuel watched Ted Wilson disappear into the shadows with Jake's men. Another soul lost to greed, another lesson in human nature's darkest corners. But there was no time for regret now. They had to adapt, had to survive, had to find a way to turn this betrayal into an opportunity, because Samuel McCullough hadn't lived 90 years by giving up when the odds turned against him. He'd lived by turning those odds back on themselves. The church basement was a scene of chaos and despair. Townspeople huddled together, whispering about Ted's betrayal, while Sheriff Parker tried to reorganize their defensive positions. But Samuel sat calmly in a corner, cleaning his gun with methodical precision. "Sir," Parker approached, his voice tight with tension, "they know all our plans. Every position, every escape route. We're trapped." A slight smile crossed Samuel's weathered face. "Are we now?" He finished with his gun, sliding it smoothly into its holster. "Tell me, Tom, did you ever wonder why I had Ted Wilson mark all those positions on his map?" The sheriff blinked, confusion replacing worry. "What do you mean?" 90 years teaches you something about people," Samuel said, rising slowly. "About greed, about weakness. I've known Ted Wilson 30 years, known how he resented this town, how he dreamed of escape." His eyes glinted in the lamplight, known he was feeding information to Jake since the day they arrived. Sarah stepped forward, understanding dawning. "You gave him false information." "Not false," Samuel corrected, "just incomplete. Every position Ted marked was real. Every tunnel he revealed exists. But they're not our only positions, not our only paths." He turned to the gathered townspeople. "Remember what I taught you all last week? About the old silver mine shortcuts?" Bill Henderson spoke up from his position by the door. "The ones you made us memorize. Said they were too dangerous to mark on any map. Those very ones." Samuel's smile grew wider. Ted couldn't betray what he didn't know. And Jake's so focused on the bank, on his brother's gold, he won't think to look deeper. Martha Wilson stood, her face a mixture of grief and determination. "Ted always did say you spent too much time teaching the young ones about the old mining days. Said it was waste of time in this modern age." "Modern age," Samuel scoffed. "Some things don't change, like how a desperate man will always take the bait if you dangle it right." He moved to the center of the room, his presence commanding attention. Right now, Jake thinks he's won, thinks Ted's information has given him the upper hand. He'll get cocky, make mistakes. "And that's what you've been waiting for," Sarah finished, pride in her voice. Samuel nodded. Jake's obsessed with repeating the past, with settling old scores, so focused on what happened 30 years ago that he can't see what's happening now. He turned to Sheriff Parker. "Get our people into the real positions, the ones we practiced. In secret, let Jake's men waste their time watching the decoys." The mood in the basement shifted as understanding spread. This wasn't a desperate last stand. It was a carefully laid trap, months in the planning. "What about Ted?" Martha asked softly. "Your husband made his choice," Samuel replied, his voice gentle but firm. "But maybe seeing how thoroughly he was played will help him make a better one before this is over." Outside, they could hear Jake's men moving through the streets, confident in their stolen knowledge. But now the defenders of Redemption Springs moved too, silent as shadows through passages only Samuel knew, taking up positions that existed on no map. "Remember," Samuel told them as they prepared to move out, "Jake thinks he's fighting the same battle from 30 years ago. Thinks he knows every move I'll make because he's spent decades studying that night." His hand rested on his gun. "But he forgot the most important lesson I ever tried to teach him." "What's that?" Sheriff Parker asked. "A good lawman doesn't just learn from the past," Samuel said, eyes hard as steel. "He learns to change with the times, to adapt, to use an enemy's expectations against him." He checked his gun one final time. "Jake wanted the past?" Well, he's about to learn that some old dogs know plenty of new tricks. The trap was set. Now it was time to spring it. Midnight brought a new kind of silence to Redemption Springs. The sporadic gunfire had ceased, replaced by the tense quiet of predators stalking prey. Jake's men moved confidently through the streets, following Ted Wilson's map, unaware they were being watched from positions that existed in no document. Samuel stationed himself in the old carpenter's shop, its weathered walls offering clear views of both the bank and the saloon. Sarah worked beside him, preparing medical supplies while keeping her voice low. "Michael's been asking for you," she whispered. "Says there's something else about Jake's plan you need to know." But Samuel's attention was fixed on the saloon's entrance, where Jake had just emerged, gathering his men. Even at this distance, the old lawman could read the confidence in his enemy's stance, the certainty of victory in his movements. "He's called in more men," Michael had warned earlier. "Told us before all this started. If things got tough, he had friends waiting in Devil's Canyon. Just needed to light the signal fire on Baker's Ridge." Samuel passed this information through the secret network of positions he'd established. Bill Henderson's quiet voice came back through the darkness. "Got eyes on Baker's Ridge. No movement yet. But there's wood stacked up there, ready to burn." Time was running short. Jake's men were taking up positions around the bank, preparing for what they thought would be their final push. Ted Wilson moved among them, pointing out the tunnel entrances he knew about, his shoulders bent under the weight of his betrayal. "Poor Martha," Sarah murmured, watching her friend's husband. "She hasn't said a word since we found out." "Sometimes the heaviest wounds don't bleed," Samuel replied, checking his ammunition one last time. Each bullet was a carefully measured decision waiting to be made. Through the back passages of the carpenter's shop came Sheriff Parker, moving as quietly as his boots would allow. "Everyone's in position," he reported. "The women and children are secure in the old mine shaft, just like you planned. And Bill Henderson's boys are ready on the rooftops." Samuel nodded, satisfaction flickering across his face. "Jake thinks he knows these streets because Ted drew him a map. But he forgot something important about maps." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "They only show you what's on the surface." Samuel's voice carried the weight of decades, not what lies beneath or what hides in shadows. Outside, clouds parted briefly, moonlight silvering the dusty streets. They could see Jake's men spreading out, taking up positions that Ted's map had marked as vulnerable. Each one of them was walking into a carefully prepared crossfire zone, though they didn't know it yet. A soft whistle carried through the night. 3 short notes, 1 long. The signal that Martha Wilson had been seen, leaving her house, moving toward the bank, just as Samuel had predicted she would. "She's going to confront Ted," Sarah realized, starting to rise. Samuel's hand on her arm stopped her. "Sometimes a man needs to see his betrayal through the eyes of those he's hurt most. Martha knows what she's doing." Indeed, they could see Martha's figure now, standing in the street before the bank. Her voice carried clearly through the night air. "Theodore Wilson, you look at me when I'm talking to you." The effect on Ted was immediate. He straightened up, turning toward his wife's voice, like a flower seeking sun. Around him, Jake's men shifted uncertainly, weapons half raised. "Your father built this bank," Martha continued, her voice steady despite the guns aimed her way. "Your grandfather dug these tunnels, and you'd sell them out for Jake Hawkins' blood. Money?" Samuel watched the scene unfold, his experienced eyes catching every detail, the way Ted's hands shook on his borrowed rifle, the growing uncertainty in Jake's men as they witnessed this unexpected confrontation. The subtle movements of townspeople in hidden positions, ready to act. "Almost time," Samuel murmured, more to himself than to Sarah and Parker. "Jake won't be able to resist making a show of this. His kind never can." As if on cue, Jake himself stepped forward, his voice cutting through the night. "Enough of this family drama. Wilson, prove where your loyalties lie, take care of your wife." The moment stretched like heated glass, ready to shatter. In the darkness of the carpenter's shop, Samuel's hand moved to his holster, decades of experience. Reading the signs in the air, the storm wasn't just gathering anymore, it was about to break. Ted Wilson stood frozen in the street, his borrowed rifle half raised toward his wife. Martha hadn't moved, her spine straight as steel, eyes locked on her husband. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, and all of Redemption's springs held its breath. "Do it!" Jake commanded, his voice harsh with impatience. "Prove you're really one of us, or maybe you'd like to join her instead." In the carpenter's shop, Samuel shifted slightly, positioning himself for what was coming. "Watch Ted's left hand," he whispered to Sheriff Parker. "See how his fingers keep twitching. Man's about to make a choice." Sarah gripped her medical bag tighter. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I knew Ted's father," Samuel replied softly. "Known Ted since he was a boy. He's weak, but he's not evil. And Martha just reminded him of who he really is." As if proving Samuel's words, Ted's rifle barrel began to lower. I can't," he stammered. "Martha, Jake's reaction was instant and predictable. His gun came up, aiming at Ted. "Useless, just like I thought." "Fine, I'll handle both." The shot that cut him off didn't come from Samuel. It came from Bill Henderson's position on the roof, striking the ground at Jake's feet. In the same instant, Ted threw himself toward Martha, shielding her as all hell broke loose. Samuel's voice carried through the chaos. "Now, position 3, hidden." Shutters slammed open throughout the street. Rifle barrels appeared from unexpected angles. Jake's men found themselves caught in the killing zones Samuel had prepared, their stolen map worse than useless. It had led them right into the trap. "Fall back to the bank!" Jake screamed, diving for cover. "Get to the tunnels!" But Samuel was already moving, his old bones forgotten in the surge of action. "Sarah, get Martha and Ted to safety. Tom, signal Bill's group to shift to position. For it's time to show Jake why you don't bring yesterday's tactics to today's fight." The carefully orchestrated plan unfolded like a deadly dance. Each time Jake's men tried to reach a tunnel entrance they thought was safe, they found it covered by multiple rifles. When they sought the high ground Ted's map had marked as unguarded, they ran straight into Henderson's sharpshooters. "They're heading for Baker's Ridge," came a cry from the darkness. "Trying to light the signal." Samuel's voice cut through the night. "Let them. Bill's boys replaced their signal fire with wet. Wood hours ago. No reinforcements coming, Jake. Not this time." Through the chaos of gunfire and shouting, Samuel caught glimpses of his town fighting back. Young Tommy Peterson, proving himself a man by helping wounded townspeople to safety. Martha and Ted Wilson, reunited in the crisis, passing ammunition to the defenders. Sarah, moving fearlessly between positions to tend the injured. "Getting light in the east," Sheriff Parker noted, reloading his rifle. "Dawn's coming." Samuel nodded, watching as Jake's men were slowly but surely pushed back toward the saloon. Fitting. 30 years ago, Jake ran away in darkness. This time, he'll face justice in the light. A desperate cry came from the direction of the bank. One of Jake's men had found a tunnel entrance not on Ted's map and walked straight into a dead end Samuel had created decades ago. "You're finished." "Jake," Samuel called out, his voice carrying the weight of destiny. "Surrender now. Save what's left of your men." Jake's answer was a burst of wild gunfire. "Come and get me, old man. One last dance, you and me." In the growing light, Samuel could see his enemy clearly now. Jake stood in the saloon doorway, his face twisted with rage and desperation. The younger men who'd followed him were either captured, wounded, or pinned down. His careful plan had crumbled, his stolen intelligence proved false, his reinforcements unable to help. "Your choice, Jake," Samuel said, stepping into the street. "Just like 30 years ago. Just like with your brother. You can save these boys, or you can die trying to settle old scores." The sun's first rays painted the street in shades of gold and shadow. In that light, Samuel McCullough stood tall, his 90 years falling away like an old coat. Here was the legend Jake had obsessed over, the lawman who'd haunted his prison dreams. But more than that, here was justice itself, weathered but unbroken, tempered by time, but never dulled. Dawn had come to Redemption Springs, and with it, the time for final reckonings. The rising sun painted Redemption Springs in shades of amber and crimson, as if the very light knew blood would be shed this morning. Samuel stood in the middle of the street, his shadow stretching long behind him. 30 feet away, Jake Hawkins emerged fully from the saloon, his face twisted with decades of hatred. "Just like old times," Jake called out, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years in prison. "You and me, McCullough. Only this time I ain't some scared kid running away." Samuel's response was calm, measured. "No, you're just an old fool, leading young men to their deaths, like your brother before you." The mention of his brother made Jake's face darken. Around them, the town held its breath. Sheriff Parker and his men had Jake's remaining followers contained, but no one dared intervene in what was about to happen. This was more than a gunfight. It was history completing its circle. "You want to know something funny, old man?" Jake's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "All these years in prison, I convinced myself you were some kind of Superman, the legendary Lightning McCullough, faster than death itself." His hand hovered near his gun. "But look at you now, just a tired old man waiting to die." Sarah watched. From the clinic doorway, her heart pounding. She'd seen her grandfather practice his draw 1,000 times, seen how even at 90 his hand could move faster than eyes could follow. But Jake was no young hothead. He was a seasoned killer, with nothing left to lose. "Last chance, Jake," Samuel said softly. "Your men are beaten. The gold's not worth dying for." "Gold," Jake spat in the dust. "You think this is about gold?" His eyes blazed with madness. "This is about justice, about what you took from me, my brother, my future, my whole damn life." Samuel shook his head slowly. "I didn't take anything, Jake. You and your brother made your choices, just like these boys you led here. They chose to follow you, and now they're paying the price." As if to emphasize his words, a wounded gang member groaned nearby. Sarah instinctively moved to help him, but her grandfather's slight head shake stopped her. Any movement now could trigger the violence building in the air. "Always so righteous," Jake snarled, "standing there judging everyone else's choices while you play God with people's lives. Tell me something, McCullough. Did you give my brother a chance to surrender before you shot him in the back?" The accusation hung in the morning air. Samuel's voice, when it came, carried a steel edge that made even Jake pause. "Your brother died facing me, gun in hand. I offered him the same choice I'm offering you now. He chose wrong." Jake's laugh was ugly. "Well then, let's see if 30 years of planning pays off." His eyes narrowed. "Draw." Samuel didn't move. "No." The single word seemed to confuse Jake more than any amount of threats could have. "What do you mean, no? Draw your gun, damn you." "Make you a deal, Jake," Samuel said, his voice steady. "Surrender now. I'll tell you the truth about that night, about why your brother really died, about the letter your mother received." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Jake's face, but then his features hardened again. "More lies. You're just trying to save yourself. Look around you." Samuel gestured at the town. "Look at what your revenge has brought. More young men dead or wounded, more families torn apart. When does it end, Jake?" "It ends when one of us is dead." Jake's control finally snapped. His gun cleared leather in a blur of motion, but Samuel had been ready for 30 years. Before Jake's weapon was level, the old lawman's revolver seemed to materialize in his hand. Lightning still struck in Redemption Springs. 2 shots shattered. The morning silence, so close together they sounded like one. Jake's bullet kicked up dust at Samuel's feet. Samuel struck Jake's gun, sending it spinning away in a spray of metal fragments. Jake stood frozen, staring at his bleeding hand. 30 years of hatred, of planning, of dreams of revenge, all undone in the blink of an eye. "How?" he whispered. "You're 90 years old." "Age isn't just about what it takes away, Jake," Samuel said quietly, his gun unwavering. "It's about what it teaches you. Every morning for 30 years I practiced, not because I wanted revenge, not because I was afraid, but because I knew. Someday, someone would come to my town thinking that being young and fast was all that mattered. The rising sun had fully cleared the horizon now, its light revealing the truth of what had happened. Jake's carefully planned revenge had failed not because he wasn't good enough, but because he'd never understood what really made Samuel McCullough dangerous. It wasn't his speed with a gun. It was his patience, his wisdom, his unwavering dedication to justice. "Your brother died because he wouldn't listen," Samuel continued, moving forward to kick Jake's broken gun away. "Because he thought violence was the answer to everything. You spent 30 years making the same mistake." Jake sagged to his knees, the fight draining out of him like blood from a wound. Around them, the town began to stir. Sarah moved to tend the wounded. Sheriff Parker and his men secured the remaining gang members. The long night was over. "Take him to the jail," Samuel told Parker. "Him and any of his men still breathing. Judge Harrison will be here tomorrow." He holstered his gun with the same smooth motion he'd practiced for decades. "Make sure they all get fair trials, even Jake." As they led Jake away, he turned back one last time. "You should have killed me, McCullough. 30 years ago, you should have killed me." Samuel watched him go, feeling every one of his 90 years. "No, Jake. I should have found a way to save you, like I'm trying to save these boys you led astray." He looked at the wounded gang members being treated by Sarah. "Maybe this time some of them will learn what you never did." The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist and the shadows of the past. Redemption Springs had lived up to its name once again, offering a chance for redemption to those who would take it, and justice to those who wouldn't. Lightning had struck one last time in the Old West, but this time it had struck to save lives, not take them. A week after the shootout, Redemption Springs was healing. Broken windows had been replaced, bullet holes patched, and the streets cleared of the signs of violence. But the town had changed in ways that went deeper than repairs could reach. Samuel sat in his familiar rocking chair, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar colors. Sarah worked beside him, checking the bandage on a small graze he'd received during the final confrontation. "Judge Harrison's verdict came in today," she said softly. "Jake and his hardcore followers are going back to territorial prison. But those two young ones who surrendered, Michael and James, they're getting a second chance. 5 years probation, working at the Webster Ranch." Samuel nodded, satisfaction in his weathered features. "Sometimes justice needs a gentle hand. Those boys just needed to see there was another way." Down the street, Ted and Martha Wilson walked. Together, their hands clasped. Ted's testimony had earned him leniency, but his true punishment was in the eyes of his neighbors. Yet slowly, as he worked to rebuild what his betrayal had damaged, the town was beginning to forgive. "You know what Jake never understood?" Samuel mused, watching the couple pass. "A man's legacy isn't in how fast he can draw or how many fights he wins. It's in what he leaves behind." He gestured at the town around them. "Look there." Sarah followed his gaze. Young Tommy Peterson was helping Bill Henderson teach other boys proper rifle handling. The wounded gang members who'd survived were being treated in her clinic with the same care as townspeople. Even Sheriff Parker had grown, his confidence strengthened by the crisis. "You taught them all," Sarah said proudly. "Not just about fighting, but about justice, about mercy." Samuel smiled, the last rays of sunlight catching the silver in his hair. Every generation thinks they have to learn everything new, but the real wisdom is in knowing which old lessons to keep and which new ones to learn. The church bell rang, out calling people to a town meeting, but this one wasn't about defense or danger. It was about the future, about the railroad coming, about changes on the horizon, changes that, thanks to recent events, seemed less threatening now. "Time to go, Grandpa," Sarah said, helping him up. "They'll want to hear what you think about the railroad plans." Samuel rose, his movement still steady despite his age. The West's changing, girl, but some things stay true. Justice, mercy, community. He patted his gun, now more a symbol than a threat. Sometimes people just need reminding. As they walked, Toward the church, the setting sun cast their shadows long across the street. Redemption Springs had faced its trial by fire and emerged stronger. Not unchanged, but unbroken, and in the end, that was Samuel McCullough's greatest legacy. Not that he was the fastest gun in the West, but that he had taught a town and a generation that true strength lies not in the speed of your draw, but in the wisdom to know when not to draw at all.